Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles's webinar, Philanthropy in Israel Today. My name is Naomi Strongen. I'm Vice President of the Foundation's Center for Design Philanthropy, where I oversee community grant initiatives and advising services for our fundholders on philanthropic opportunities locally and in Israel that match your values and interests. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. I want to remind you that we are recording the session. Also, if you would like closed captioning, please press the button that says CC at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have questions during the webinar, you can use the Q&A box. Feel free to type your questions as the webinar is going on, and we will get them after Offi, our speaker, finishes her remarks. Israel remains a top priority for the Jewish Community Foundation, in this moment now more than ever. Most recently, the foundation allocated $2 million in institutional grants to support organizations focused on mental health and trauma, youth at risk due to the war, and efforts to address social cohesion. Since October 7th, the foundation has directed over $10 million toward Israel emergency funding. We expect this figure will only continue to grow in a substantial way, especially considering that over the past decade, the foundation and our clients have distributed more than $200 million to over 500 organizations in Israel. My colleagues and I at the foundation are here for you. We want to answer your questions, help you figure out your giving, and guide you in making grants to organizations that are most meaningful to you. In particular, Megan Davis, our new Senior Philanthropy Advisor on Israel and combating anti-Semitism, would be happy to guide you in meaningful giving in Israel. We will put contact information in the chat during the session. During the webinar, we will also share with you giving opportunities to consider supporting emergency needs in Israel. And now I'm honored to introduce the Foundation's on-the-ground Israel consultant, Offi Zisser. Offi brings more than 2 decades of experience working in philanthropy with dozens of funders, foundations, and corporations. Her philanthropic career began at the Joseph Drown Foundation in Los Angeles and continued in various senior roles in Israel's philanthropic landscape, including heading the Advisory Service Division at Jewish Funders Network Israel and managing the Azrieli Foundation in Israel. Offi, we are so happy you're here with us today. Take it away.
Thank you, Naomi. And thank all of you for joining the session, for wanting to learn more about the current state of affairs in Israel, especially in times when your own communities in Los Angeles need your attention and care as well. Naomi asked me to start by saying a few words about myself. It has been 32 years since I was part of your community, having been one of those Israeli kids who was raised in Los Angeles, went to El Camino Real High School, then to UCLA and Pepperdine. As Naomi mentioned, my career in philanthropy started in Century City with the Joseph Drown Foundation, where I worked for over 5 years until I returned to Israel in 1993. This time as an adult, at a time in which regional peace seemed around the corner and the high-tech boom was in its infancy. I loved Israel then, and I love it now. I live in beautiful Caesarea by the sea, where my husband and I raised our 5 children, all of whom served or currently serve in the IDF, even my youngest, who fought for the right to serve her country, even though she's exempt for health reasons. Those of you who joined a webinar with us in October 2023 might remember what a wreck I was then, still trying to come to terms with the horrific attack of October 7th and dealing at the same time with having 3 boys recruited to the war, each being an explosive expert, each unreachable for days, each in real danger. At that time, the country was pleading for your support for the most basic needs of people in a disaster area. People left their homes with only the clothes on their backs. They needed food, shelter, clothing, emergency emotional first aid. And the soldiers needed basic equipment, having left their homes to go to the front line even before being called up to their duty, and before the army was able to gear up for the sudden deployment of another 300,000 reservists. We are now on day 580 of this bloody and terrible war. The needs are very different. The mood is very different. This is what I will try to share with you today. If you ask an Israeli today, what's the date? Some of them may answer that today is October 580th, 223. Ask them, Manishma, how are you? Many will answer, Shlomi kishlom ami. My well-being is as the well-being of my people, meaning not so good. But in order to understand Israel today, we need to go back to January 4th, 2023, 2.5 years ago. That is the day that the earth shook in Israel for the first time, with the announcement of the judicial reform. Regardless of one's opinion of those reforms, in those months, from January to October 7th, every Israeli felt the growing division and polarization among us. We were torn and divided and exhausted when the horrific attack took place on October 7th, followed by the country's longest and bloodiest war, which continues to this day. Every Israeli is affected by the events of these past 2.5 years. The vast majority of us are traumatized, hurting, and concerned for our personal future and for the future of the nation. The internal instability, the grief over those who lost their lives, limbs, and mental well-being, the fear for one's safety, the uncertainty of what lies ahead, the rise in cost of living, and the unstable work situation is experienced by all 10 million Israelis, no matter if they are secular, religious, ultra-Orthodox, Arab, Bedouin, Druze, Cherkessian, or refugee. You don't need to have a family member who is still hostage in Gaza, be a friend of someone who was killed on October 7th, or know someone who was injured or killed since then, to feel the loss and helplessness, to feel spent and broken. I would assume that you know what I mean, in the sense that every Los Angelino feels devastated by the LA fires and feels at greater danger, even if their house was not harmed. Currently in Israel, the official numbers estimate that of the 10 million, 3 million Israelis are experiencing symptoms of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress. Of those 3 million, more than 500,000 are expected to be at risk of developing diagnosed PTSD. When the numbers are so huge and the needs so great, we, as the community of funders, always ask ourselves, what can I do to help? Which populations, geographies, or issues are of greatest need of my support? And how do I know which organizations are really doing the good work? So the answer is, who you should help depends on your personal and family values. When there are so many people suffering and in need, it is for you to prioritize. Are the returning hostages and their family the topmost priority, or the families of the 59 hostages that are still in Gaza? They are absolutely a topmost priority, even though These returning hostages are receiving the best medical treatment and will receive a disability allowance for the rest of their lives. Their needs are much greater than what the public health system and government allowances can offer. And remember, it is not just the hostages, but their families too. Do you know that as the hostages started returning, the hospitals realized that their family members have not been taking care of themselves for the past year and a half that they were fighting for the release of their loved one? They didn't have regular checkups, didn't go to the doctor when they felt something was wrong, didn't treat their own anxiety or blood pressure, didn't even make it to the dental hygienist. So the hospitals changed their protocols, not only treating the returning hostages, but treating all the family members at the same time, meeting their emotional and physical needs. Are the wounded soldiers the topmost priority? They certainly are. And so are their families, who also neglected themselves, much the same way the families of the hostages have. Within this huge category of almost 500,000 soldiers, there are the enlisted soldiers, their parents, their brothers, their grandparents and friends. There are the reservist soldiers, some of whom were recently called to duty for the 7th time, having been away in one of the borders for over 400 and sometimes even close to 500 days. Their spouses were left behind, their children, their parents, their grandparents, their businesses and their jobs, all have suffered. Circles of people who are impacted, who are traumatized, who most likely need emotional and financial supports. Are the kibbutzniks and the moshavniks from the Gaza envelope, those who cannot return to their destroyed and burned homes, the topmost priority? Absolutely. Are the farmers whose lands were destroyed, first intentionally by the Hamas agricultural terrorism, and then by the tanks as they trampled over their crops on their way in and out of Gaza, are they a top priority? And if we're speaking of the farmers, how about the farmers on the northern border? Those who couldn't tend to their fields and orchards and vineyards for over a year? What about their soul, their neshama, as they need to return and see their lifelong enterprise burnt to the ground, their trees and vineyards dry, their chicken coops destroyed by missiles? And I haven't even mentioned yet the evacuees. At the height of the crisis, there were 240,000 displaced persons from their homes. Those in the south needed to leave without a moment's notice, some still in their pajamas. Those in the north quickly followed with a bit more warning time. But little did they know that they won't be returning to their homes for over a year. Most of these families are now returning to their homes and trying to resume their new normal. But that's not possible. For 70% of the homeowners in Metula, where 460 of the 650 homes were hit by missiles, or the people of Kibbutz Manara, where not only 70% of the homes have damage, but also all the public structures, from the communal dining room to the workplaces. And still they return. They now need to face the reality that their teenagers, who pretty much didn't attend school in a regular fashion for over a year, are far behind in their studies. Many of them who were normative kids have now turned to alcohol and drugs, are experiencing depression, anxiety, and social detachment. And the elderly population, which is experiencing a rapid decline, having been uprooted and displaced into an unfamiliar and temporary environment. A whole new population that was independent, productive, and functional is now classified as at risk and requiring welfare, mental, and financial services. Add to the evacuees those who were not evacuated because they're in the second or third line of fire. They stayed in their homes, but lived in a danger zone for a year and a half and still do. In a reality that they don't let their kids go to the neighborhood playground. They regularly need to stop and duck on the side of the road on their way to work at the sound of a siren. They have businesses that stand empty, whether it's their family restaurant, their two-three Zimmerin, their B&Bs that haven't had a guest since 2023, or their hair salon whose regular clients have moved elsewhere. I can go on and on classifying Israelis by populations impacted by war and social division, but it is also important not to forget those populations that were in need prior to the war, irrespective of the war, whose needs only grew larger because of the war, and because of the redirection of public and philanthropic attention from their needs to war-related needs. I'm referring to at-risk youth in boarding schools and youth villages, victims of domestic violence, the LGBTQ population, which has seen a drastic reduction in public funding from the current government, the poor elderly population who have to choose between buying food and buying medicine. I am referring to issues of social justice, shared society, environment, human rights, hasbara, and so much more. And again, I want to emphasize that these are problems of every Israeli, regardless of their religion. There are Arab, Muslims, and Christians, Bedouin, Druze, and Cherkessian that have had loved ones killed, that were evacuated, that stayed at their homes and lived under rocket fire for months on end, that have children who are wetting their bed at the sound of a racing motorcycle that reminds them of the siren, that have experienced pain and economic devastation. So who is the topmost priority? My answer is all of the above. You are encouraged to choose to focus on the population, issue, or geography that resonates with you or the organizations that you appreciate and trust. The issue can be making sure every child has food on their plate, every senior citizen can purchase the medicine they need or have the money for heating in winter. With the steep rise in the cost of living due to war, more and more people don't have access to basic needs. Another issue is the mental well-being of the people. And yes, there are services targeting each population by age, religion, and geography, culturally adapted to their specific needs. It can be helping the farmers who are trying to rebuild their livelihoods close to the borders. These are the Israeli real chalutzim, the pioneers. It can be helping to tame the rising violence in the homes or in the communities. With more guns in the homes and more aggression that comes from having been on the battlefield or having lost one's business or job comes more violence. You can choose to support the healthcare workers who need more training and more TLC as they experience exhaustion and burnout. Another need, which has been somewhat neglected with the growing war-related issues, is supporting ways that help Israelis find solidarity and cohesion in these times of conflict. And for many Israeli funders, the most burning issue is helping to preserve the democratic values of the country that define itself as Jewish and democratic. And the list goes on. So my suggestion to you is to start by following your heart. At the same time, be sure to vet the organizations that you choose to be the recipients of your generosity. If you don't know how to choose, the Foundation Center for Design Philanthropy is a fantastic resource that is available to help you support Israel in the ways that matter most to you. We can help you identify organizations that meet your values and verify for you that the organizations you're choosing are well managed and financially sound. For starters, Naomi, Megan, and I have put together a list of organizations that we've vetted and can recommend, which you can find on the Foundation's website, the link of which will be added to the chat shortly. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It gives examples of some organizations, and we try to include some which are less known, that are mid-size, that are doing amazing work now, and for which your donation can make a huge difference. Finally, I know this presentation was very gloomy, so I want to end by sharing that in spite of these terrible times, this is still the Israel we love. 50% of our population, 1 out of every 2 people, regardless of religion, chose to volunteer and help the other during this war. Hundreds of thousands of people pour into the streets on Saturday night to show their support for the families of the hostages. And we now know that the hostages are aware of this show of support, and it gives them the strength to hold on. We also know that the power of community in Israel is the source of our resilience, helping our members stay strong and productive. We know there are hundreds of nonprofits that stepped up and literally are saving lives and souls. Their teams committed to helping the other today as much as they were committed on October 8th. We are in awe of the returning hostages who, instead of being busy with their personal recovery, are traveling all over the world to fight for the remaining hostages. And if they're here, they come to Hostage Square to support the other families. I see them there every Saturday night, and my heart explodes with pride of these people who are total strangers to me, but for whom I have carried my flag high every Saturday for 580 days. And as a former Los Angelino who never got used to the Israeli nightlife, my heart dances when I see my children's Israeli spirit and zest for life as they join their friends, filling the bars and restaurants of Tel Aviv with laughter. And as I meet families who fill the trails of our national parks, prioritizing their vacation time in the north and the south to reinvigorate the businesses of those areas. This is still the Israel we love. There is so much work to be done, but we will rise again. We will rebuild our country to be better and stronger than it was before. I hope I succeeded in giving you a taste of how things are here and how you can think about your Israeli giving. We're more than happy to answer your questions. Naomi?
Thank you so much, Offi. There's a lot to unpack there, a lot you talked about. I want to remind everybody that if you have questions, you can type your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We may not be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll do our best. And I want to start with a 2-part question for you. You mentioned, needs of a lot of different populations, from hostage families to evacuees to farmers and so on and so forth. Are there enough resources in Israel? Have the number of mental health professionals grown? How are the professionals in Israel able to support all of the growing need? And part 2, how are the professionals coping? Because there's so much need that I'm sure the professionals are also one of the populations in need.
Great questions, Naomi. It is true that Israel's public healthcare system has been underfunded for a long time, even before the war, especially the mental health field. And it has been a challenge to have enough mental health professionals available. especially when there's a lot of competition now on every mental health professional. The healthcare funds want the mental health professionals, so do the hospitals, and so do the nonprofit organizations, and there's a lot of competition. One of the things that we have been very supportive of is training of mental health professionals, even bringing in students who are still in university, but psychology students, social workers, to bring them into the system and to have them already work. Another thing that the country is very busy with is what is known as stepped care. How you keep the psychiatrist and the psychologist for the people who really need them, and engage the educators and the community workers to assist the ones who need less intervention and perhaps prevention and community resilience. So there's been a lot of effort on that part. There are also a lot of technological developments on how to do first screenings, using AI and using various tools to help. This is still startup nation, and there are a lot of creative people, both in the for-profit and nonprofit space, that are being engaged on how to have more caretakers helping the Israeli community. You touched on the point of helping the helpers. This has been a major issue in Israel and has been addressed by a number of organizations very effectively. We have to remember that in this particular crisis, most of the caretakers are also experiencing the same crisis themselves. They come from areas that are being bombarded. They have been evacuated. Their children are going through crisis, and at the same time, they need to be treating the other. So a lot of organizations have stepped up with retreats and professional workshops. And I have to say some funders, including some included on this call, have done the amazing thing of setting aside some of their funding for the staff, saying, please take a certain percentage or a certain amount of money from my donation and please treat your own staff. Take them on a vacation. If you see a staff member that needs additional therapy, please support them. Have get together, just have fun a little bit, just to have the time to tune out from everything that everybody's doing. And it's unrelenting. The war has just picked up again like a bad fire, and people are back on reserve duty, and the needs have grown tremendously. So yes, taking care of the caretakers has been a huge effort.
And I know Offi is referring to in the foundation's 2024 grant making, we required a percentage of our dollars to go to the well-being of staff, and the organizations were. The feedback we received from the organizations about that requirement was more gratitude than we've ever received before. So it was something that was very meaningful to many of the nonprofit organizations that we funded. We have a question here about the educational system and what's happening on the educational front with so many kids uprooted from their homes and their communities. Are most Israeli children getting a normal education? Is it haphazard, makeshift in certain areas? How is that all working?
Yes, good question. So people have been uprooted from their homes. I'm referring to the people of the North and the South. They have been uprooted from their house. This is already the second school year that they're not in their homes. And now in March, they were told that they're supposed to go back to their homes. But their children are in the middle of a school year somewhere else. So they don't want to uproot them. These kids have had so many changes in their lives and so much trauma in their lives. So they want to wait until June to go back. But some families have gone back because the economic incentives that were given, like rent subsidies, ended in March. So some families had no choice but needed to go back. So they're going back to Kiryat Shmona or to Shlomi or to places like that, to schools that don't have enough staff because the teachers are still teaching somewhere else, or their own families have not returned. And this has created a major problem for schools. It created a major problem for schools that had to receive all these children to begin with in the end of October of 23. And now it created another problem that the teachers are stretched thin between the different schools and the different situations. So here again, it requires a lot of creativity, bringing in students, bringing in retired teachers, bringing in informal educators to work in the education system. We are already in May, and school ends, elementary school ends at the end of June. So everybody's trying to create all kinds of very creative ways of helping these kids in all locations. And of course, we need to remember these children have a lot of new emotional needs. They're having a very hard time sitting again, dealing with all the studies that they have missed. So yes, this is a major situation. And just like we had, and you know it as well as we do in COVID, how difficult it is for the children with all these changes and the lacking the continuous education. So we experienced the COVID, and now we're experiencing this.
Yes, but COVID is exactly what was on my mind as you were talking. A good question I have here: where do you feel are the biggest gaps in giving? So there's so much need. People are giving to so many things. Are there areas that are not currently being supported in a big enough way? Or and maybe on the opposite end of the spectrum, areas that are being over supported and perhaps those funds could go somewhere else?
I don't think there's an area that is over supported at this time. I think that the needs are, I think there was an amazing outpour. I mean, I know that there was an amazing outpour of support in the first 6 months or year of the war. But all the needs that I described are not needs of a 1 year or even 2 years. Supporting people mentally, supporting people economically is a 5-year effort, probably, is not a 1 or 2 year effort. So even organizations that succeeded in raising a lot of funding, hopefully they were being very prudent about the funding that they received, and they will stretch it over the next few years when there's going to be less funding, because there's going to be other crises and other needs in Israel and around the world. Areas that are underfunded are the areas that are always underfunded. The elderly, the periphery, small organizations that don't have the fundraising infrastructure. So there are a lot of those organizations that for them, they don't go on the road shows, and they don't have the fundraising teams, and they are doing amazing work in small communities for the people who are exactly the people are in need. So those are the areas that are underfunded.
And then as a follow-up to that, how do you vet? I know you talked about this a little bit, but then when there's 3 organizations that are all working in a certain area, it's an area, that's important to you, meaningful, and then there's 3 of them. How do you vet? How do you know which one is using the money most appropriately and doing the best work and making the most impact?
So yeah, this is exactly where you need to apply a professional lens, because as you said, there are many organizations doing similar work, and we want to try and fund those organizations that are properly managed, and that your buck will go the longest way. So here is where you need to really get to know the organization, its management, its CEO, but also the other people who work in the organization. Look at who the board of directors are. Are there people on their board that actually bring value to their organization? Look at their financial statements and their budgets. Sometimes that may only be available in Hebrew, in GuideStar, in the Israeli GuideStar, and sometimes that information is also available in English. But absolutely look that the organization is well managed financially. There are amazing people running nonprofit organizations, but Some of them are not the most savvy managers. And in this situation, you need people who are both professional in their field of work, but also are good managers that will know how to manage this organization, especially considering that so many of these organizations are experiencing tremendous growth. I can think of one organization up north that does community resilience that at some point was hiring 50 therapists a month. And when pre-war, they had less than 50 therapists altogether. An organization needs to know how to expand. They need to have the organizational consultants working with them how to build a management infrastructure and not only provide more service. So these are the types of things that you would want to look at. And always ask your peers, ask places like the foundation that has a professional staff, because there are many organizations doing similar work.
Thank you. We do have a question here about the foundation's Israel grants and what the foundation will be prioritizing this year, and I can answer that. That I can say with certainty that mental health and trauma will absolutely be something that the foundation prioritizes. I mean, you heard from Offi that is a top priority, a top need in Israel, and that is something that we will focus on among other things. But more importantly, we want to help our clients. We want to help all of you. And so, as Offi said, whatever is important to you, that's where we can help you find the organizations that are doing the best work, that are most impactful in any area of giving.
I want to add something about mental health, if I may. With mental health, in the beginning, it was very important to identify the people who were at risk of PTSD, of developing PTSD. Right now, a lot of the effort is going into identifying people who are not reaching out for help. There are some people who know that they're in distress and are in areas where they know who to reach out to. But what we're realizing that there are so many families and children and wives of reservists and reservists themselves that are saying we're okay. There are other people who need more help than we do, but they're actually the ticking bombs. So being able to identify those people and doing prevention measures with those people before their little problems become big problems is a major thrust right now.
Yeah. Thank you. I like this question. Something I've been thinking about a lot. Are missions still coming to Israel in big numbers like they were a year plus ago? And if so, what is the reaction of the Israelis who come into contact with these missions? Are you finding that they're boosting the country? This person participated in one a few months ago after 10/7, and it was a very powerful and meaningful experience.
Of course it was. So for a while, I would say for the first year, there were so many missions. And there are two things I can say about the missions. First of all, it is so heartwarming to see people who are coming here and are asking us, how are you? Are you okay? Just knowing that you're not alone when you're going through such a terrible and prolonged trauma. It is amazing to see people who come into this disaster area and really want to see how we are, and just a hand on your shoulder can be huge at a time like that when you're feeling lonely as a country, and with all the anti-Israel sentiments around the world. I will say that from my experience, and I did want to say it was amazing for the hotels, because the hotels stood empty and the restaurants stood empty. So having these delegations, it really was like a breath of fresh air. I feel that there are less delegations now because the people who wanted to come and could come have already come, probably more than once. During this time, I am getting the sense that there are less delegations now. We are in like this new normal period, but I'm sure there will be most welcome. Remember also in the beginning, there were a lot of delegations coming in to volunteer.
Right.
That the farmers needed help with picking, the hospitals needed help with volunteers. the country has geared up and doesn't need that volunteer help anymore. So that part has weaned.
And what organizations or approaches are being taken to heal or resolve political divisions in the country? You mentioned before the war, there were these huge protests around judicial reforms. Are those divisions still there and unresolved?
I'm afraid that Israel is as polarized as it was on October 6th. There was a period there for the first few months of the war that was amazing, the way that people got together and unified and realized that we had to be together in order to prevail this terrible situation. But for various reasons, the country has gone back to being very polarized, very divided, and that's terrible because that's another front that is against us. So yes, there are organizations and there is limited bandwidth. In the Maslow pyramid, when you're dealing with basic needs and danger, there's less attention to issues of social divides. But if we don't address those now, it will be very difficult to rebuild the country. And we do know organizations that are doing wonderful work. For those of you who visit Israel, you know that so much of the workplace in Israel has become a mixed workplace. We have Jews and Arabs working together. We have ultra-Orthodox and secular people working in the same workspaces. We have had tremendous progress. A lot of it takes place in the workplace of bringing people together. In times of tension, there are amazing nonprofit organizations that are helping the workplaces, the universities, the joint spaces find ways of working together because it is very difficult. It is very difficult to be an Arab coming into the university. We really wanted them to integrate into the workplace, but they come into the university setting and there are quite a few reservists there with their guns sitting at the desk in university. These are things that need to be mitigated, and there's a lot of work being done to make everybody feel comfortable in their shared spaces.
Yeah. All right. There was another question you touched on it. Are there still peace building organizations? What would you recommend? What does their work look like? So it sounds like there's peace building just in the workplace organizations, and then there are larger peace building organizations as well who are absolutely doing work.
They are absolutely the ones who were there before, and we're happy to answer that offline with specific names. But if you're asking those questions, those organizations, they are continuing to do good work. And it's really, it's a breath of fresh air to see the work that's being done with people who are not giving up in this time of hopelessness.
There's a question about the recent fires in Israel. It seemed like the entire country was on fire, where a lot of homes and businesses lost. Was it primarily a forest fire? Talk about the fires, and actually, similarly, perhaps maybe talk about what's been happening this week in Israel as well, with reservists being called up, and just kind of maybe give a little update on the latest.
Actually, I was joking with Megan before that, it's you don't listen to the news in Israel for an hour and another dramatic thing has happened in Israel. So we've been on this webinar for 45 minutes. I'm sure something happened that I'm unaware of. But going back to the fires, luckily this time, the fires were there were no loss of lives like there was in the Carmel fires about a decade ago, or maybe even more. There was very little loss of businesses, but there was a lot of loss of fire. There were fires all over Israel, but the major fire was in the Jerusalem mountains, and it was contained within a day or two. So it sounded very scary. I will say that unlike previous fires, our neighbors were not quick. And I mean, Greece and Croatia, and of course, we didn't ask Turkey that we did in the past. We're not quick to send help to send in their aircraft to help us, but luckily we were able to contain it. It was, from the LA fires, there was a change of the winds. There was a little bit of rain, and there was a miracle. We had a little miracle. So that's for the fires. Unfortunately, the winds are strong today, and there's another khamsin, there's another very dry winds and heat, and there's a fear again of fires now. As you mentioned, the beginning of this week, the government decided that they were going to increase or expand the war again, calling in reserve duty soldiers again. The exhaustion is just unfathomable. It is very difficult. People are so Zionists. They're so eager to defend their country, but the eagerness and the purpose that they felt on October 7th is not the same now. And one of the most important things when it comes to the Army is having these organic units, these guys who've been fighting together since they were 18, and they're brothers to each other. And every single time we go into war again, there are less and less people joining because their businesses have fallen apart, because their divorce rate is up enormously, because the families cannot handle what's going on. So unfortunately, we're seeing less and less people going into the reserve duty, and that's a major problem. The morale is down. People, how long can you do this? This is not like a 9/11, a one-time event. This is an extended event. We open the news every day, and we hear about injured soldiers and killed soldiers. It's daily. It's awful.
Well, so actually that leads to my next question that somebody asked about opportunities to provide expertise to fill the gaps, advisory, other things besides money. Are there opportunities to support in other ways?
So there has been a lot of cross-pollination with organizations in the States, organizations that work with veterans that have come to work with Israeli organizations, adapting the models. It's very difficult to provide help, expertise, because it needs to be culturally adapted. So there are certain organizations in which it works. I'll give you an example. There's an organization called Iran Emotional First Aid. They provide a hotline for first aid 24 hours a day. So if you get trained by them and you live in Los Angeles, then you can provide the hotline. You can man the hotline in the hours that the Israelis are sleeping, but still there are some people who need support. So there are certain ways that you can help with expertise, but it is very difficult. It's just like, with the volunteering with the farmers. With all due respect to all of us, we don't pick fruit as well as hired labor that they know that what they're doing. So it's very helpful in the beginning, in the emergency. It is less helpful at this point. And it's also becoming very difficult. I will say that, in the beginning, like doctors came to help. Doctors from overseas came to help, and there were special provisions to allow them to come and work, because volunteers still work and it requires work visas. So there were provisions for that in the beginning of the war. There aren't provisions for that now anymore. So it's kind of complicated to come and volunteer in a professional role.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to ask one last question, which you touched on in your initial remarks, but I want to again end on a positive note. What gives you hope as we move into the next days, weeks, months, years? What gives you hope?
Yeah. Two things give me hope. The first thing that gives me hope is the people of Israel. People like Rachel Goldberg Poland, who lost her son Hirsch in the tunnels of Gaza. who has not withdrawn into her own grief, but is rising to every occasion to demand the return of the remaining hostages in captivity. People like Eli Sharabi and Keith Siegel and the other returning hostages who are fighting for the same cause. It's the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who spend every Saturday evening supporting the families of the hostages, showing up for these strangers who they feel they already know so well, so they won't be alone. And the second thing that gives me hope is you, our wonderful, generous, and caring brothers and sisters from miles and miles away that are showing up for Israel and its people, especially during these times when showing up for Israel is not so easy. So I ask you to hang in there for the people of Israel who are lovely and strong and yearning to rebuild this country and to make it better than it ever was. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Offi. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, I want to emphasize that my colleagues and I are at the foundation are here to assist you. We want to answer your questions. We want to help with your giving. You can find contact information for myself and for Megan in the chat, as well as on our website. Please, please, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all so much for being here and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.